Hey everyone, welcome to Pit Stops to Podium, the RevPartners podcast where we talk to execs who have competed and won, taking their companies from high growth to high scale. My name is Brendan Tellison. I am the co-founder and CEO of RevPartners, and I'm delighted to have with me today Jen Allen for this episode of Pit Stop to Podium. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you. Jen, as we were joking earlier in prep, you're in Chicago. I'm in Atlanta. I think I'm winning as it relates to the weather right now.
No doubt.
But Jen, I would love for you to introduce yourself, for our guests that may be joining. You are the chief evangelist at Challenger, and you also have a podcast. And so I'd love for our audience to get to know you a little bit. So who is Challenger and what is your podcast?
Yeah, Challenger, many people know from the books, the Challenger sale or the Challenger customer. It is a sales methodology that we implement with B2B organizations. And Winning the Challenger Sales podcast is all about taking the theory from the book and breaking it down from a seller's perspective, which I am, and showing how we take that Challenger mindset and approach things like discovery, negotiation, running group meetings, social selling, you name it, with a Challenger mindset in mind.
That's great. Well, it's definitely been a revolutionary is too strong of a word, but it's definitely been a powerful tool for a lot of salespeople such as myself along the way. So thank you for doing what you are doing.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, Jen, your title gives a little bit of a sneak peek on what we're going to be discussing today. But before we get into the big idea, we do have a tradition here at Pit Stops to Podium, and that's to get to know our guests outside of work. So what are 3 fun facts that our audience should know about you?
Okay, so my big passion in life is dog rescue. That's where when I retire, I'm going all in on dog rescue. I've got 3 dogs in the background. Hopefully they'll be quiet, probably not. That's my big passion.
What kind of dogs do you have?
So they're all, 2 of them are mutts. Those 2 are mine. And then my fiance's dog is a King Charles Cavalier, but they're all little guys.
Okay. All right.
That's my big passion. Fun fact number 2, I am 40 and I am getting married for the first time in March. So I'm super excited about that out in Jackson Hole. And then as part of that, I have never had any of my own kids and I am inheriting 4 amazing kids. So I went from completely single on my own to full-fledged family without giving birth to any of them. So there's my fun facts.
4 kids, 3 dogs, and a future spouse. That is, you have a lot going on.
Yes. And we got a ferret a couple months ago too. So I always forget about Ernie the ferret, but he's here too.
How old are the kids?
Kids are 8, 10, 14, and 18.
Oh, wow. Okay. I have 3 that are 8, 6, and 4. So I thought you were going to go down, but you went up.
No, I went up. I've never changed a diaper in this house. So that's a win on my part.
You are winning. You may be in Chicago, but you are winning with the diapers. Well, Jen, it's fun. Let's transition a little bit. As I mentioned, your title may kind of give it away a little bit, but I think this is, when we think about where the market is headed and kind of this new way of demand generation, it's evangelism. And it seems to be a buzzword as really the next frontier of growth. And so before we get into tactics and how to measure, let's first talk about what is it. So how would you define what evangelism is? Because that's a big word that has an emotive response. So I'd love to know how you describe it.
Yeah. First of all, I hate the word. I wish there was another word. Somebody come up with it and tell me what it is, because I absolutely hate it. But to me, it is actually far less about marketing your solution or your product and actually marketing the problem and the underappreciated problem that your solution calls or solves for. So the way that I sort of came into this is last year. I've been a frontline seller for 18 years. I never wanted to be a sales leader. I've always just loved sales. There's so much to learn. Marketing leads started drying up. And rather than point the finger back at marketing and go back and forth again, what I did is I said, what can I do? What's within my control? And so I just started posting on LinkedIn more. I got involved in our podcast and webinars and things like that. And then something really curious started happening, which was I then started getting these very senior salespeople, sales leaders showing up in my DMs on LinkedIn being like, hey, I've heard of Challenger. I thought it was this. I'm starting to think that maybe it's this. You nailed a problem that we're facing on our team. Can I just talk to you before I go into anybody's sales process? And so I realized there was a lot of legs to that. And so I ultimately said, what if instead of forcing someone to submit a lead form, we could actually have them have a conversation with someone like me who's got a lot of subject matter expertise, help them shape their thinking, and then hand them off to an AE. And so to me, it's kind of this notion of like edu-sales. Like I'm not yet selling you, I'm helping you think through the problem so that you have either greater or lower confidence saying, I should explore Challenger as a solution. And it's been a phenomenal success at Challenger using that approach.
Yeah, it sounds like you're aligning the tactics to really this modern buyer's journey where they don't want to be sold to, they want to be solved to, where you're providing solutions. And it's interesting too, because I feel like a lot of times sales rep feel like that's a marketing job, but it sounds like what you're saying, no, I'm going to be proactive and take control of that experience.
100%, right? Like if you look at one of the things we studied is how customers buy today. And we've been talking for a long time about how many stakeholders are involved in a buying decision. The last time we looked in 2020, it was like 11.2 people, right? So you think about 11.2 people making a decision on anything, right? Let alone an investment for a company in a recession, it's really hard. So what they actually do is they spend a lot of times with themselves. So like 83% of the time that they spend buying actually is them doing their own research offline, online. It's them in meetings. And then the remainder, that 17% is with sellers, but that's all sellers for all suppliers they're considering. So if we go by the rule of three, that means I get like 5-6% of my buyer's time. And by the time they get to me, they've already figured out what they think they need. And now I'm trying to back them up. And that to me is where evangelism plays a heavy role, because I'm looking at that 83% timestamp and I'm figuring out how do I get involved there. So I'm not just an order taker and crossing my fingers that they want exactly what we have to offer by the time they engage me.
Yeah, I love it. We're firm believers in that approach as well. And I think we talk to any of the candidates that we talk to is it's not a matter of we basically say we don't believe in it's not that we don't believe in prospecting, we just don't believe in cold calling, or at least we think it's inefficient. And there is a better way to do it, and it's this whole evangelism type of tactic that you're describing, which I think gets into kind of a good segue is, what are the tactics? What are ways in which people can take initiative? They may say, hey, I don't know if that's for me. I'm nervous. I'm worried. That's uncomfortable. But maybe what are some tips or tricks that you've seen work as it relates to tactics for creating this type of evangelism in the market?
Yeah. So I would say there's two approaches, right? So there is, if you're a company, right, and you're considering evangelism, you can do like Challenger did and name an evangelist, right? And that's the role that I have. It's my full-time job in addition to selling. Or you could say, how do we empower our people to evangelize just more naturally as part of the conversations that they're having online and offline, right? So Todd Clouser, who's someone I really respect in the space, he calls that bottom-up evangelism. So I think there's two different sort of approaches you could take. Then from there, there's also different flavors of evangelism, right? So my big thing is our company's business problem is lots of people know the Challenger sale. They love the book. Very few of them actually work with us to roll out training. They DIY it, or they think they like just handing out the book is enough. So that's a distinct problem our company needs to solve. So I'm out there trying to expose the fact that reading the book is not enough because you miss all of these things. And that's where my content is geared towards. However, I work with other evangelists just in, kind of communities and things like that, who say that they are trying to build like a groundswell of users, right? So they might take more of an approach of saying, my goal is to build a community. We don't have a community here at Challenger, but other companies pursue that. Like a Chili Piper, I think, does a phenomenal job of building these really powerful, engaged end users. And so I think there's different flavors of what you use evangelism to do. But the most important advice I can give anybody is do not hire an evangelist or do a bottom-up evangelism strategy with the goal of brand awareness. It is too freaking fluffy. You can't measure it. It is not what you need. Like nobody gets paid for brand awareness. We get paid when we have a commercial impact. So I think it really entails when you establish an evangelist role at the business, being very specific about what business problems are they going to solve? How do we know when those problems are having meaningful progress? And how do we agree we're going to measure on that for success?
So let's take you as an example. Did you stumble into this, or was it like, hey, Jen, we want you to be our chief evangelist? So it's almost like the chicken and the egg. Like, how do you, who initiates? Like, Is it, hey, we're seeing getting traction. Maybe you should do this full time as opposed to just being a seller. So how did that happen?
So I have an interesting career in the sense, like every 2 years, not intentionally, I think it just happens where I get bored and I'm like, how can I make sales more interesting, right? So the 2-year mark, my last time was last year. And for me, what I always step back and do is I say, what part of the sales process lights me up? And what I was finding that it was like, it's not that I don't love closing deals. We all love closing deals. We love the paycheck. But for me, the big thrill, the kill was when I get an executive to think differently about their problem set. So early on in kind of discovery. So it taught me, hey, early on is what lights you up right now. How can you shape a role where you actually do more of that stuff instead of the full cycle stuff? So I came across an article by that was written by Ethan Butte over at BombBomb, and he was interviewing Guy Kawasaki. He was interviewing Dan Steinman at Gainsight, and he wrote this big article with all these podcasts about evangelism. I had never heard the term. When I read it, I was like, "This is exactly what I want to do. I hate the name, but it's what I want to spend my time doing." And so I took that. I built a job description off the back of it. I stated the business problems I was going to intend to address. And then I took the results I had from doing this stuff just side of my desk, like our podcasts and writing content on LinkedIn, the leads I was originating. I brought it to my CEO, and I was really fortunate. She was very open-minded to it. And I said, let's try it for a year. If we can have a meaningful impact on our lead generation, on the deals closing, on the sales cycle to close them, let's commit to it as a strategy. And so that's how I ended up in it. It was totally self-led.
That's awesome. Well, I think, yeah, it's good. It's a good segue probably into our last topic, which is how do you measure it? And your CEO sounds like she was very open, receptive. I'm imagining that some of our aspiring evangelists may not have the same type of structure. So what are proactive ways that you would recommend, hey, here's the way you should think about evangelism in terms of value it creates to create that business case for you and your organization?
Yeah. So for me, I've always been a seller. I've always had a goal. So it was also important to me. I'm like, I don't want to go into this fluffy job where I have no idea. Am I doing well? Am I not doing well? So again, we took the business problems we wanted to solve for. So it was just the market's perception of challenger. It was new lead generation for new logo. And then it was reduction of customer churn by giving customers more content to consume that kept them on the challenger journey longer, right? Like those are the three things. And then I sat down with her, our head of sales, and I said, how are we going to measure what success looks like here? So some of them are easier, right? Like for customer churn, we can look at when I am involved in a deal, is there a delta for how many of those customers were new versus ones that I'm not? For new logo acquisition, what we did is we built a lead source option in Salesforce, where when I was getting a DM on LinkedIn, I would go into Salesforce, I would log the lead, I would market it as evangelist led for the source. And then we can pull a report that shows, pipeline generation by evangelist led opportunities versus marketing opportunities. And then the third one, which was a little bit trickier, is we had to look at influence. So this is things like an AE is working a deal, they bring me in, and I'm there for an SME type role.
Yeah,
and
not the originator, but you
exactly.
have some type of influence on it closing.
Exactly. So then I was able to, on those opportunities in Salesforce, check a box that says evangelist influenced, right? So all of that is to say, I don't capture my impact on learners, meaning like we have 20,000 downloads of our podcast every month. I have no idea who those people are. I wish I did. I don't, unless they come in. But I'm tracking hand raisers that are a result of me actually having a conversation or people reaching out. So I have at least some way to measure my success. So like where we are today, there's 7 million in deals that were originated or influenced by evangelism. That makes me feel good that I'm like, what I'm doing is actually working. If I did not track that, that would be a really yucky spot in this recession, because what am I going to say? Like I get a lot of likes on my posts. That doesn't really, nobody gets paid off of that. So,
yeah, it's a nice vanity metric, but I don't know if it really helps the company. And then that probably goes to your point earlier about brand. It's brand is really hard. Like it's hard to quantify the value of that. So that makes sense. What would you recommend for companies? So you mentioned there's two different ways to look at it. If you're like the chili piper example, what would be ways to measure it from that lens?
Yeah. So I would look at what is happening as a result of people being involved in the community. So do we see those people like consuming more of our services? Do we see them buying more of our services? I think it's always what happens. And this is where I've talked to some evangelists who are like, hey, I grew this community. I'm like, great. Are they buying more? Are they advocating for you more? Are they referring customers? Like, what is the so what of whatever that you're doing? Because I think it is so easy for it to be treated like this really fluffy marketing channel. And that to me is the difference not to knock marketing. I want to be very careful for how I say this, but we're not just going for like these vanity metrics. We're going for commercial impact. And so whatever I'm doing, if I'm building a community, I want to be measuring, are they referring us more? Are they buying more? What is the commercial outcome as a result of that? So I think regardless of what flavor of evangelism you have, you got to be crystal clear and get that alignment up front. I've also spoken with a lot of evangelists who said, I didn't actually have a really clear job description. I didn't have a way of like measuring my success. And now they're scrambling to figure it out. So
oh, I just saw one of your dogs. So if you follow through with your guarantee. So before we get into the next step, Jen, this is a little bit of off script, but who would you say is doing evangelism well? I know we mentioned Chili Piper. Let's do an individual. Outside of you, of course. Who's one that you say, hey, he or she is crushing it, and my audience, you should follow him or her if you're looking for how to get into evangelism?
This is an easy answer for me. Will Aitken over at Vidyard is my favorite evangelist because one, he incorporates their product. So a video recording, he does it so effortlessly. He lives that product through his content. And I just admire so much the way that he is balancing education with entertainment. So I always label him as like, he's like the edutainment guy. And so I think you can learn so much, but you have fun doing it. And I think for that reason, he's been so effective at growing that audience, converting non-users into users. So I learn a ton from him. I really admire what he's doing.
Oh, that's great. It's always fun to share lessons learned and promote people that are doing good work.
Yeah.
Well, Jen, thank you so much for coming on this episode. I've learned a lot, and hopefully our audience has too. The next step they can take as it relates to evangelism. If our audience wants to engage with you or with Challenger, what is the next step they can take?
Make it easy. Just reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's Jen Allen at Challenger.
Give that origination, people. Give the origination. Let's tag it.
Exactly. Thank you so much for having me, Brendan.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.